couple of years back, I was driving late at night, heading across the country to visit my family. You know, one of those long-ass trips where it feels like you've been on the road forever. I don't get to see them often since I live on the other side of the country now, so I figured I'd just suck it up and make the drive. The roads were mostly empty, barely any cars, and it was after midnight. I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, one of those rural highways that stretches for miles without a single streetlight, just fields and darkness all around. I had the radio on low, more to keep me awake than anything else. I'd been driving for hours, and the only thing on my mind was getting to my folks' place and crashing into a bed. Then, out of nowhere, I spotted this guy on the side of the road. He was just standing there, old, kinda hunched, with one of those scruffy, worn-out jackets, the kind you'd expect someone to wear if they'd been outside for hours. Now, normally, I'm not the type to pick up strangers, but something about this felt different. It was late, cold, and the guy looked harmless enough. Plus, I figured maybe his car broke down or something. It's not like there was anyone else out here to help him. So, I slowed down and pulled over. There wasn't anyone else on the road, and I figured the guy looked harmless enough. He shuffled over to the car, and I asked if he needed a lift. He just nodded, and I told him to hop in. He looked old, worn out, like he'd been standing there for hours. So, I thought, why not? I could take him to the next town and be done with it. Seemed like the right thing to do. At first, the conversation was normal, just that usual small talk you make when you're stuck in a car with a stranger. You know, where you headed, how long you've been driving, weather talk, all that stuff. He told me he'd been traveling for a while, but didn't really say where from or where to. Seemed like an odd detail to leave out, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I was mostly focused on the road, trying to stay awake and get through the drive. As we talked, I was just trying to keep it light, trying to fill the silence so the ride didn't get too awkward. But after a while, I noticed the guy started steering the conversation into some darker territory. He made some comment about the dangers of the road, how you never know who you'll run into out here. And that's when he dropped something strange about how people can be real unpredictable. I didn't know where he was going with it, so I just nodded along. Then, somehow, we ended up on the topic of crime. I don't even know how it happened, but suddenly we were talking about stuff like robberies and break-ins, and I'm sitting there thinking, how the hell did we get on this subject? But before I could even think of how to change the topic, he hit me with the real shocker. He starts talking about prison, not just in a general sense, but personal experience. He casually mentioned he'd done time, not just a few months, but over 20 years. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. I didn't ask him what for, but he just kept talking like it was no big deal. That's when he told me he'd been in for murder. My heart started racing. I tried to keep cool, just nodding along, but my mind was going a million miles an hour. I'm sitting there with a literal murderer in my passenger seat, and it's the middle of the night, miles away from anywhere. He's sitting there telling me about how he'd made a mistake, how he wasn't the same person anymore, how it had happened so long ago. He said he regretted it, that it haunted him every day, but still, murder. I could feel the tension building in the car. I wasn't sure if he could tell, but I was starting to freak out internally. I mean, who just drops that kind of bomb on someone, especially in the middle of nowhere when I'm the only one around? He kept going on about how prison had changed him, how he'd paid his dues and all that. He said he wasn't dangerous anymore, but I wasn't taking any chances. I kept my eyes on the road, nodding like I was listening, but my mind was racing. My thoughts were all over the place. Was he really reformed, like he said? Or was this some kind of setup? Was he messing with me, or worse? Was I in real danger? Every minute felt like it was stretching out forever. I couldn't get the thought out of my head. This guy had killed someone. It didn't matter if it was a mistake or if he regretted it. The fact was, he'd done it. And here I was, sitting alone in a car with him, driving down a pitch-black highway in the middle of the night. I was trying to act normal, trying not to let on that I was freaking out. But the silence was getting heavier, and I could feel my anxiety creeping up. All I wanted was to get him out of my car, and the small town I was heading toward felt like it was getting farther away with every mile. He must have noticed I was getting nervous because he said something about how he wasn't going to hurt me, that he was just grateful for the ride. He said he knew how it sounded, but that he was done with that part of his life. He just needed to get to town and be on his way. I wasn't exactly comforted by that. I mean, it's not like I was going to believe everything he said after he dropped the whole "I'm a murderer" bombshell on me. I kept driving, glancing at the clock and trying to figure out how much longer this ride was going to take. It felt like forever, but finally, I saw the lights of a small town up ahead. I could have cried from relief at that moment. As soon as we hit the edge of town, I pulled into the first gas station I saw. I didn't even ask if this was his stop. I just slowed down and waited for him to get out. He thanked me, said something about how people don't usually help each other out like that anymore, and then he was gone. I sat there for a second, watching him disappear into the darkness before I peeled out of the gas station and drove off as fast as I could. My hands were shaking, and my heart was still pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I'd picked up a literal murderer. Since that night, I've made a rule. No more picking up strangers. I don't care if they look harmless or if it's the middle of nowhere. I'm not risking it again. You never know who you're letting into your car, and after that night, I'm not willing to take any chances. Okay, so I was driving home from a buddy's party one night, and it was already pretty late. I had a few drinks, but I wasn't feeling too buzzed, just a bit tired. I figured it was best to head home before I got too sleepy. The roads were quiet, and I was just minding my own business when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought nothing of it. Just another car on the road, right? But then I noticed the car wasn't just passing me. It was right on my tail, following way too closely. My heart started racing. I couldn't shake this feeling that something was off. I glanced back and saw the car was a dark SUV with tinted windows. It gave me a weird vibe and my instincts kicked in. I decided to pick up the pace a bit. As I turned onto a side road, I noticed the SUV was still behind me. That's when the panic really set in. I started thinking about how easy it would be for them to box me in or something. I didn't want to be a target, and my mind started racing. What if they were waiting for the right moment to rob me? I imagined them with baseball bats or something. I knew if they caught me, I wouldn't stand a chance. I turned onto a few back roads trying to lose them, but they stayed right on my tail, even when I took sharp turns. I could see their headlights reflecting off the trees, and every time I looked back, they were still there. I felt like I was in one of those thriller movies where the protagonist is being hunted down. My palms were sweaty, and my heart was pounding. I spotted a gas station up ahead. It was old and dimly lit, but it was my best shot at getting away from whoever was behind me. I pulled in and parked quickly, hoping they'd drive past. I glanced back, and to my horror, I saw them pull in right behind me. 4 guys climbed out of the SUV. They looked rough, wearing hoodies and jeans, and I could see they were carrying something long. My stomach dropped. There was no way I was sticking around to find out what they wanted. I hit the gas and took off, tires squealing as I sped away from the gas station. As I drove, I dialed 911, trying to keep my hands steady. The dispatcher answered, but I could barely form words. I was still shaking from the adrenaline. I just kept driving, making random turns, hoping to shake them off. I could still see their headlights in my rearview mirror, but they seemed to be getting farther away. I turned onto another road, then another, praying I would finally lose them. The landscape outside started to change from trees to more houses. My heart was still pounding, but I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe I'd finally lost them. I didn't want to look back. I was too scared to see if they were still there. After what felt like an eternity of driving and dodging, I finally pulled into my neighborhood. I rushed into my driveway, parked the car, and jumped out. I locked the door behind me, my hands still shaking. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I locked all the doors and turned on the lights, feeling safe for the first time since all of this started. I stood there in my living room, breathing heavily, just trying to calm down. I replayed everything in my head, how close they were, the panic that set in. I couldn't believe how easily a fun night could turn into a nightmare. I spent the rest of the night with the blinds drawn, peeking outside every few minutes, making sure no dark SUVs were lurking in my neighborhood. I was on edge, checking my phone for updates from the police. They had assured me they would send someone over to check the area. Eventually, I fell asleep on the couch, the lights still on. I woke up the next morning, feeling like it was all a bad dream. I couldn't shake the anxiety, though. I felt like I'd been lucky this time, but I knew that the world can be dangerous. From then on, I was a lot more cautious about my late-night drives. I learned that night that sometimes the biggest threats can come from the most ordinary moments. Now, whenever I'm out late, I always make sure to keep my head on a swivel, just in case someone decides to turn my night into a nightmare again. I'll keep everyone updated when I hear back from the police. I'm about to tell you one of the stories that made me almost shit myself. It all happened when I was working as a delivery driver. You know, the kind of job where you're just trying to make a little cash on the side while avoiding any major craziness. Well, that night was anything but normal. So, it was a Thursday night and I was wrapping up my shift. I thought I'd just have one last delivery and call it a night. But then I saw the address and my heart sank. It was in one of those neighborhoods that everyone warns you about, the kind where you don't want to stop unless you absolutely have to. I hopped in my car, trying to shake off the bad vibes. I turned on some music to keep my mind off things. But as I got closer, the whole scene changed. The streets were dark, and there were barely any streetlights. It felt like I was driving into a horror movie set. I could see a group of people hanging out on a corner, and they were getting loud. I thought, great, just what I need. When I got to the intersection near the drop-off, that's when things really went south. I stopped at a red light, and out of nowhere I saw two guys going at it. I mean, these dudes were throwing punches like they were in a boxing match, and it didn't look like it was going to end well. Blood was flying everywhere. I felt my stomach turn. Then I heard a gunshot. Yeah, a freaking gunshot. At that moment, I was like, nope, not today. The crowd went wild, and I swear people were running in every direction like cockroaches when you turn on the light. My heart was racing as I hit the gas the second the light turned green, and I peeled out of there like my car was on fire. I managed to park as close as I could to the delivery address, but I wasn't about to linger. I grabbed the food, praying the whole time that no one would notice me. I sprinted to the house, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might just explode. I knocked on the door like a maniac, hoping they would open it quickly. When the customer finally answered, they looked totally chill, like nothing was happening outside. "Hey, thanks for the food," they said with a big smile. I just handed it over, barely able to keep it together. All I could think was, get in and out as fast as possible. Once I dropped off the food, I bolted back to my car like I was in some sort of race. I swear I could hear the chaos from the fight still going on, and I was just praying I wouldn't get caught up in it. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and hit the gas as fast as I could. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the images from my mind. The fight, the blood, and especially that gunshot. It was all too real. I was so relieved to get back to the main road, where things felt normal again. After that night, I made a promise to myself. I would never, ever deliver to that neighborhood again. No amount of money was worth risking my life for some cold fries and a burger. Honestly, I'd rather get fired than end up in a situation like that again. When I got home, I parked the car and just sat there for a minute trying to wrap my head around what had happened. It was hands down the most terrifying experience of my life. I mean, who thinks they're going to witness a street fight and a gunshot while just trying to do their job? I've had my share of sketchy deliveries before, but this one took the cake. I can still hear the yelling and the chaos in my head. It was a wake-up call for sure. I figured it was better to stay safe and find other ways to make money than to risk my life for a job. Anyway, after that night, I decided to stick to safer neighborhoods. I'll take my chances with the pizza-loving suburban families any day over whatever madness I just witnessed. So yeah, that was my crazy night as a delivery driver. Those are some dangerous, man, like damn. Life's too short to mess around in the wrong places. I gotta tell you about this super sketchy Uber ride I had the other night. It was one of those nights where my friends and I went out to hit the clubs, and honestly, it was a blast until it wasn't. So, we're dancing, having a great time, and I'm feeling good, but my friend Jess, well, let's just say she had one too many drinks. She was supposed to be my ride home, but by the time we were ready to leave, she could barely stand, let alone drive. I knew I had to get a ride, so I pulled up the Uber app and ordered a ride. When my driver pulled up, I got in and instantly felt a bit off. The guy looked normal enough, but there was something about his vibe that was just weird. He greeted me, and we started driving. I thought, okay, maybe I'm just paranoid. But then he started asking me questions like, do you have a boyfriend? And do you live alone? That really creeped me out. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just small talk. But the way he kept asking made me feel super uncomfortable. I mean, who asked that on a ride home? I could see we were going off the route, and it really creeped me out. I knew where I was supposed to go, but he kept taking these unnecessary turns. I felt trapped, like I was in a horror movie or something. I pulled out my phone and texted Jess, letting her know I was feeling really uneasy about the ride. I didn't want to freak her out, but I just said, hey, my Uber driver is acting weird. I'm not sure he's taking me the right way. I could practically hear her freaking out on the other end, but I didn't want to keep texting her while I was stuck in the car with this guy. As we drove, he kept throwing more questions at me like, what do you do for fun? And what's your favorite thing about living alone? I felt like I was in an interrogation room, not a car. It really creeped me out, and I was thinking about how to get out of this situation. Finally, I spotted my street, but instead of turning, he kept driving. That's when I really panicked. I told him, hey, I think you missed my stop. He just smiled and said, oh, I know a shortcut. Shortcut? Yeah, right. I needed to get out of there. I quickly texted Jess again, telling her I was almost home and to wait for me outside. I said, just in case I need you to come get me. I lied and told the driver someone was waiting for me, saying it was my boyfriend. I figured if I made it sound serious, he might back off a bit. When I finally convinced him to take the next right, it really creeped me out. I could see my apartment complex coming up, and I was so ready to be out of that car. I said, thanks for the ride, but I need to get out here. He looked at me in the rearview mirror, and I could see a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, but he pulled over anyway. As soon as I jumped out, I took a deep breath, feeling a rush of relief wash over me. I turned around and watched as he drove off, but I was still on edge. I hurried inside, and Jess was waiting for me right by the door, looking worried. I told her everything, and she was like, what the hell? That's so creepy. I didn't even want to think about it anymore, but I knew I had to report him. Once I was safe in my apartment, I pulled up the Uber app and left a detailed review about my experience, warning other riders to be cautious. Honestly, I'm still kind of shaken up thinking about it. Like, what if I hadn't texted Jess? What if I hadn't told that guy someone was waiting for me? It's crazy how one ride can go from fun to terrifying in just a few minutes. I'm definitely going to be more careful about who I ride with in the future. Anyway, I just wanted to share this because it's a reminder. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this other one filled with even more chilling horror stories. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this other one filled with even more chilling horror stories. Just click right here. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more spooky content. See you in the next one.